going to go ahead and get started with our program this evening. And I want to welcome everyone to Reconciling Tensions Between Communities of Color and Law Enforcement. Looking forward to a great night of discussion, and we have an excellent panel here, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. My name is Kirk Kettinger. I'm Director of Alumni Relations at Roberts Wesleyan College and Northeastern Seminary. And again, glad to have you with us this evening. We wish we could have been with you in person. But this year has been an interesting year for all of us, I'm sure. And while we're getting used to these online interactions, we do look forward to the day we can have in-person interaction and gatherings, and especially for our alumni to have you back on campus and a chance to meet with you face-to-face, either where you live or back at Roberts. So thank you for being here tonight. And if you are eating dinner, if you have something you want to drink, feel free to continue to do that. And look forward to having and happy to have you here. Let me talk a little bit about the Justice and Security Institute. The Justice and Security Institute at Roberts Wesleyan College is made up of experienced practitioners and educators who are developing cutting-edge training and conducting advanced research to help public and private institutions better protect their infrastructure, assess risk, and prevent acts of violence. And we live in an ever-changing world and a very challenging culture. And the Justice and Security Institute at Roberts is here to help organizations navigate those issues. The Justice and Security Institute is will be part and housed in the Golisano Community Engagement Center. And this is a new facility at Roberts Wesleyan College that will be built in the next year or so. And this facility is really meant to reach out to the Rochester community, but also provide much needed student gathering spaces here on campus, and also place opportunities like a chapel for meditation. And in addition to the Justice and Security Institute, we also have the Business Solutions Institute, Intellectual and Spiritual Humility Institute, English Language Institute, and Westside Psychological Services Institute. And each institute will provide unique opportunities for our students, but also for the greater Rochester community. And at this time, we have a brief video tour of the Golisano Community Engagement Center. We're going to watch that now. I think you can see from the video why we're so excited about this project. We'd love to have your support. And just to let you know the timeline, we plan to break ground in the spring, so just in a few short weeks, and open in the fall of 2022. And we'd like to thank our alumni and friends for their prayers and support. We really look forward to the way that this facility will change our campus and the Rochester community. And now I'd like to introduce Joe Testani and Herb Alexander, who will be leading our discussion this evening. Joe is the director of the Justice and Security Institute at Roberts Wesleyan College, where he manages a training and research program which is focused on making our community a safer place to live, work, and worship. Prior to coming to Roberts, Joe spent 32 years as an investigator and manager for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI. where he was recognized as one of the Bureau's top leaders and was considered an innovator in his field. Herb Alexander is the Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Dean of Students at Roberts Wesleyan College. Herb has worked in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Roberts since 2015 and helped establish the college's first Office of Diversity and Equity in 2018. As Associate Dean of Students, Herb is responsible for overseeing the institution's health center, counseling center, and overseeing the current strategies for COVID-19 testing. And as Chief Diversity Officer, he is tasked with influencing a campus culture climate that values and esteems people from a multitude of backgrounds. Herb aims to accomplish this through detailed data tracking, facilitating educational workshops, and creating strategic business solutions centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion at work. I just want to thank Joe and Herb for their expertise and all that they're going to provide and share with us this evening. And then I do want to also introduce Isaiah Lewis, who is our moderator. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Isaiah.
Thanks, Kirk, and good evening, everybody. Thank you guys for being here and part of this discussion. Just quick before we get into the discussion portion of this, we will have time for question and answers at the end. So throughout the presentation, if you have questions along the way, there is an option for you to ask them in the question and answer button or the icon. But I would ask that the panelists wait until the end and we'll go through those one at a time. Don't worry about answering them along the way. Along with that, we've got an awesome group of panelists that we're going to be hearing from tonight. And so my encouragement to everybody that's listening would be to have open ears and open heart to hear some of the insight and wisdom that's going to be shared tonight and different viewpoints and backgrounds that people have. There's a lot of experience and years of service in our panelists. And so we're really excited for that. And so just real quick, we got to get the introduction of Joe and Herb. And so I'll have Daisy followed by Dave introduce themselves quick, and then we will get into the discussion this evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Daisy Rivera Algari, and I'm the Director for the Neighborhood Service Centers for the City of Rochester.
David Cathaldi, I'm the Chief of Police for the Town of Brighton. Glad to be here.
All right, so let's just jump into it with our first question. So I'll let Joe kind of start with this, and then the other panelists feel free to chime in with your role in the Public Safety Diversity Initiative. So just quick, Joe, can you just briefly tell us what the Public Safety Diversity Initiative is, you know, how it came to be, what the timeline of it is looking like, and kind of what the steps going forward are going to be?
Sure, thank you, Isaiah. I'll go back to when I first got hired by Roberts in 2019. Herb was running the Office of Diversity and Equity, and he was having an event on campus, like a screening of The Hate U Give. I went to that screening and met Herb, and we had a great discussion after the screening about race and law enforcement and the relation between the Black community and law enforcement in general. And Herb and I stayed in touch on that topic, and he had invited me to several other events on campus, some of which I got to participate in as a former law enforcement officer. And one of the events Herb invited me to was a survey that had been conducted by some students in our criminal justice program and my predecessors at the Justice and Security Institute. That survey was more about individual departments and the satisfaction within those departments. Herb and I had a discussion afterwards about how we thought that format could be utilized to actually provide some valuable data to the departments from the communities. We had several discussions that lasted weeks. We've met Dave, Chief Cathaldi over at Brighton, talked to him about the concept, had some meetings with other law enforcement leaders, community leaders, and ultimately New York State agreed to support us with a grant so that we could conduct this study. We're about halfway through the study right now. We reached out to an analyst who designed some independent, unbiased questions that would help us determine the Black community's perception of law enforcement, and more importantly, where that perception of law enforcement is derived from. And we've got that survey out on digital form. We struggled a little bit with COVID. It made it a little tougher for Herb and I. We actually started this a couple years ago, so we certainly didn't plan for COVID. But we're working through it. We've got the survey out now, and we're starting to get results back, looking to get a broader distribution of the survey. And certainly the more people that take it, the more information we get, the more accurate our survey and analysis will be. Did I miss anything, Herb?
Yeah, thanks for that, Joe. And just add the rest of the panelists too. Just kind of give a little bit of insight into what your role is with the study and kind of how you have been an impact in it.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's been trying to think about what are like the goals of the study, where are we going, where are we headed to. And so I think the goal right now, based on, I think we all see within our society, there's a clear need for some direction, for some answers, right? And I think this study kind of helps give us the baseline of where we are. It kind of gives the community a voice, communities of color a voice into how do they perceive law enforcement, and not having someone speak for the community, right? But having the community speak for itself, which I think is unique, right? It's not the police departments or law enforcement agencies or an activist or particular community group. It's the community itself, which I think is unique, and it's going to give us a very clear pathway on where we need to go. Just because, like with anything else, in order to get to a destination, you need to know where you are first, where you're starting from, so you can then create the route to get there. And so that's what we've been talking about. That's the goal of the study. We've been working with Chief Dave, and Daisy's been great as far as giving us guidance on what are the best things to think about. So yeah, so that's been my role on how we see the study playing out over the long term.
I think from our perspective, when I first met Joe, I know there was a smaller study done, and I got to see the presentation of that. And, you know, I'll speak, I rarely do, but I'll speak for all the chiefs in Monroe County. We are all under pressure to diversify the police departments. The community has voiced their concerns pretty loud and clear that they want their police departments to better reflect the communities they serve. This isn't something new. We've been struggling with this issue probably for 20 years. And, you know, this study, I'm really hoping to get some tangible results from it, develop some action items, and let's really try and dig in deep and fix this problem. You know, diversity is an issue not only in law enforcement, it's across all of government entities, public entities. Businesses, just like the police, are trying to diversify their agencies, and hopefully the study will give us some of those answers we're looking for.
Well, I echo what my co-panelists have shared with you. My perspective comes from a neighborhood perspective. As the director of neighborhood service centers for the city, we have 4 offices throughout the city. And as you know, our city is a little bit over 200,000 residents. And you can imagine, as a service center, we get the calls, we get the concerns from our residents regarding interactions they've had with the police department. We get videos, we get recordings, and we try to address it from a quality of life perspective, which is basically what I do and my staff does. But at the same time, I come to the table as a mother of 2 young men. And so all of that kind of helps me to participate in conversations like this in regards to what do we hope the study will help us get to. And I think that one of the things that I hope is that whatever strategies are put in place, they will result evidently by changing perception, that 5 years down the road, we can see maybe sooner that the work that has been rolled out because of the study, because of what the community has told us, that we will be able to implement some of the strategies so that we can make these changes, and our workforce will begin to look like the community. And, you know, I understand what Chief Kettinger is saying, because we have gone through the same, not just our police department, but our fire department too. So it's important that, I think what's encouraging to me is that we're going to the source, and that's important to hear from them what we hope we can make some changes and implementations.
Yeah, thank you all for for sure. And so I'm kind of hearing that this boils down to letting the community speak for themselves and not to have just one voice that says I represent everybody, but actually getting and seeing what people want, what change they would like to see. And so that's awesome. And so the next question that I will get into, I'll direct it to Dave first, and then as always, any panelists that would like to chime in, feel free. And so Dave, the question is, do you think there's a difference in how the law enforcement community believes that it's perceived by communities of color versus how the communities actually perceive them, excuse me? And if you think that is the case, why do you think that is?
Well, I think right now we're experiencing some very trying times in the law enforcement profession, not only here locally in the Rochester region, but across this country. You can't turn on the news at night without seeing a traumatizing event. And what we learned and what we're seeing is events that may happen, say in Minneapolis, 15, 20 years ago, those were isolated incidents that happened in that community, and they did not translate back to Rochester in this community. And as we've seen this year, those incidents are translating back to this community. We don't operate in silos. So I do think that, because of some of these incidents, terrible tragedies, I think there's been some overgeneralizations on both sides. All police are this, or all communities of color are this, and that's just not true. There are individuals living in these communities that really want the police. The police, by and large, I think want to come into the communities and perform a good job. But getting back to what the results and what we've been hearing so far tonight is, we need to listen to the community. The community has a voice and a stake in how they are policed. And we're not necessarily subject matter experts on the way communities want to be policed. And we really need to get back to listening. We need to get back to community-oriented policing, community-based policing. I'll just leave it at that, and I'll let somebody else move.
Herb, you want to talk about our experiences as we tried to set it up? Herb and I went out and met with law enforcement leaders in our region, let them know we were going to undertake this study and hopefully get their buy-in to the study. And we went out to community leaders and met with them and talked to them about the study again to get their buy-in and make sure that we were conducting this study appropriately. And we saw both sides of that, which was eye-opening for me, at least. On the one side, we saw some people within the law enforcement community say, hey, this study is going to show you how the Black community wants us in their neighborhoods and they value us. And this issue is a contrived issue for people pushing an agenda. And on the other side of it, we saw people saying, hey, how's this going to help us defund the police? And when Herb and I came out of those meetings together, we were, hey, we really need to do this study. You can see how far apart people are on this issue, and we need to get the information so that we have a starting point of a conversation.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. And I think we just gotta first address that there is this underlying tension or undertone, undercurrent of mistrust in communities of color, specifically the Black community, when it comes to law enforcement, that needs to be addressed. And I think, to be honest too, it's a warranted underlying tone of mistrust just based on some of the historical things that have happened, right? And so we have to acknowledge that that is there and see how can we work past that. And that's come from some issues, not just the mainstream things we see or the things that we see that result in, horrendous tragedies, but some day-to-day experiences that people have that lead to some mistrust, right? But I think as far as perception, the main thing is what I've noticed, especially recently, is that people are really hunkering down in their extremes of the other angle or the other side. So kind of what Chief Kadali was saying, law enforcement may say, well, the community doesn't want us there. They don't like us. They don't respect the role or the job. And on the other hand, communities of color will say that all police are bad people, right? And they really don't like us. And so those are two extremes. And I think the main thing we got to try to work to do is how can we find some common ground or middle ground to try to curb that perception that's there.
Yeah, that's good. And so I just don't want to cut you off, Daisy, if you had anything to say. If not, that's all right too. But actually, I kind of wanted to spin it off and pose this question to you, Daisy. And you mentioned in the first question, your answer, how you're a mother of two children, or well, they're grown now, but two young men. And so, being a mother of minority children and somebody who was working, within the community to improve those relationships between law enforcement and minorities. What is your thought process on a day-to-day basis with your children? Like, what's those conversations look like with your children, especially when they were, younger and still in your nest?
Well, when they were younger, as most, any mother would do, and my husband, we would advise them, on careers they could, have options. Especially my brother-in-law is a police officer. So we tried to encourage them to do that. But as they became, of age of driving and young men and have their friends, they began, after the fact, they would never tell me like the day it happened. They waited a couple days and they would tell me they had been stopped by an officer, and the officer talked to them in a certain tone and wanted to search the car and made statements like, "You're smoking weed." Well, my boys that I know of, they're not weed smokers. I can't say that they never tried it, but at least that I know of. And they said to the officer, they wouldn't let anyone check their cars. And then finally, after I had my conversation with them, I said, "If you're not hiding anything, let them." And this is what they told me. What if they plant something? So they were already suspicious and they were scared. So after that, they were in the late 18, teen years, became 2021. They go to school, they graduate, and you say, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And I would encourage them to take the test for police officers. And they would tell me no. I mean, just absolutely immediately tell me no, because they didn't want to be profilers. They didn't want to be, snitches and et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, what are you talking? That's when I became familiar with the language that they use and familiar with the tones that they had towards police. And I'm talking, my boys are 28 and 38. So I'm talking at least 10 years ago, maybe more with my older son. And it broke my heart because I knew that the perception they had wasn't necessarily all reality. It was for them because they experienced it. So I tried to encourage them to, really think about it and give it more thought and talk to their uncle. But their uncle, my brother-in-law, is Caucasian. So they said, "He's one of them." I'm like, oh my gosh. And so it was, you can imagine Thanksgiving dinners, back and forth with the family. And finally, they chose different career paths. One of them does work with me in the city of Rochester as a senior code enforcer. But I think that he would have made his intuition, his way of thinking, would have made a great police officer, law enforcement officer. I think both of them would have. But I feel bad that they missed the opportunity. Well, one of them, he's still young. He can still go for it. But it's just how they think about it and their friends think about it. And for them, it was, I don't want to be an officer and my friends aren't going to trust me anymore. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So those comments, I could see how real they are and how we're seeing when we talk to these young people, these comments are coming out now. And it's just the reality. It's a reality for them. And because
Right.
they go through these experiences. So those are the conversations that we had. I think now they're grown men, they have families, but I hear it also. I have younger nephews, and I'm hearing some girls talk like that. Not all, but some young ladies are talking like that too. So I think we need to put more effort in recruiting these young people, but we have to address this first.
Right. And I always think it's fascinating hearing a mother's opinion, whether you be the mother of a majority or a minority. And so thank you for sharing that insight. And Daisy made a comment that, where she talked about perception being reality. And so I'm curious to know, specific Herb, you can provide some insight to this, but then Joe and Chief Cathology as well. In an age where there's a camera everywhere, and unfortunately the media can portray things to look a certain way, but like Daisy was saying, perception is reality at times. Where is that line drawn of hey, this is somebody's perception. We need to change. This is the reality. And hey, there may be something that this is getting manipulated, and this may be, fake news, as people would say these days. Where do you guys draw that line?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Zay. I think to be honest, is that it's gonna be hard. Like that line is something that I think people make decisions based on what they see, based on their already formulated thoughts. So if I already have a negative perception internally about the police, right, and I see a video that shows whatever it might be, it's called confirmation bias. That just reconfirms what I already think, right? And so I think the work to kind of help prevent that and help people being stop them people being persuaded by media is what Dave talked about earlier. How do we get in the community early so that people build relationships, right? And so so that way, by the time they get the age that Daisy mentioned, that her sons are saying, hey, I want to be a cop. I don't want to be a snitch. I want to be working for whatever it might be. They don't have those perceptions, And so now the media can't influence that much because they have a real personal connection with somebody who's in law enforcement. Versus if you don't, or your experience has only been negative, right? Then now the media is just going to confirm what you already think.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I guess, Isaiah, from my perspective, Daisy's line of perception is reality, I think is the beginning and the end. There is no changing that. If you go into someone's community or neighborhood or culture and they have a perception of you, your organization, or your community or your culture, you're dealing with the reality, right? And whether statistics show something different, it's not going to matter to the person you're sitting across from. So you need to understand that perception, and you need to be able to deal within that world, within that perception. And later on, hopefully what the study will do, will give law enforcement the tools to understand what the perception is and how to actually change that. We said our study isn't just about the perception. I think we can all safely assume what that might be right now without the data. But where is that perception derived from? Is it personal interaction? Is it disrespect of the people? Is it a lack of service? Is it social media? Is it the media? And then we can hopefully modify the behavior of the people going into that community, and in the long run, do what Herb's talking about, reach the people who have yet to form that opinion, and over the long run, maybe even change some opinions within that community.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. Perception is reality. I think one of the things that we need to do better as law enforcement is we need to look at it through the lens of procedural justice. I really think that, like when Daisy was saying that her sons were stopped and a car was searched, explaining the thought process of doing that from a law enforcement point of view. Well, we're out here stopping your car because we've received complaints from the neighborhood that there's drug dealing going on this street. And this is why we're out here. And this is why we have an aggressive enforcement campaign, because we're trying to curb the drug problem in XYZ neighborhood, which leads to other types of crimes, whether it be robberies, homicides, etc. And I think if we can explain why we're doing what we're doing, you may not be able to change the narrative overnight, but you can at least maybe explain to that person and leave that person with a positive interaction versus simply just searching a car and leaving that person like, what just happened here? Because that person is going to go tell their friends are telling their friends. And now, as they said, in the day and age of social media, what's the saying? A lie travels around the world faster than the truth can make it out of the starting blocks. So we need to be in front of it rather than playing catch up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to piggyback. That was such a good point. Just because I like, it was a procedural justice that I wrote down. Is that what you said? Okay. Yeah. Really, because a lot of times we are leaving people to formulate their own opinions because they don't have a why. And a lot of times those opinions will be negative, right? If I perceive it as a negative experience. So we can start doing things like that. I like that term. This is, today was the first time I heard that term, but I think it's critical, right? Think about changing the, reconciling those tensions between the communities of color and law enforcement. So I just wanted to affirm that.
Yeah. Thank you guys for that. That was good. And so the next question is kind of aimed more towards that, with the community relationship with law enforcement, and so for a long time, there seemed like there's the barriers in place that people have tried and worked to break down those barriers. And so what do you think are the barriers to making real lasting change in this area, of these increased tensions between minority communities and law enforcement? And we'll start with Joe on this one.
I think one of the things that would sort of jump out at me in our community, Isaiah, and we'll back up a little bit. Part of the reason the initial study took place was, as Chief Cathaldi alluded to, the departments in our region, in our county, had been criticized for not reflecting the communities they police, meaning the number of minorities policing those communities didn't reflect the number of minorities living in those communities as a percentage. So I think when your department doesn't reflect the community and they're not from the community, there's a level of distrust immediately. And I think one of our loftier goals in this, and might be a long-term goal in this, is to turn that around. So again, if we can start with understanding the perception of the community, that should give us an idea of where they are and then how to change our behavior within the community. That should then increase the community's respect for the job. And unlike Daisy's children, hopefully they'll then apply for the job, and you'll have more minority representation within the departments, and then continuing snowball of trust and acceptance and ultimately ownership of those departments.
I'm going to chime in a little bit on that, because this touches a little bit of what I do day to day for the city. You can't know me if you don't know me. So if you're policing my neighborhood and you stop and I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's say you're a brand new officer and you don't know the neighborhood and folks don't know you. There's some apprehension about that, but there's one thing that there was a practice a time ago that I really love, and I hope that we will bring it back. When we had a graduating class of the police academy, they would invite some neighborhood leaders to the graduation to meet the graduates. And I took full advantage, because I would invite my business association presidents at that time. That's what I oversaw. And they would gladly meet with them and say, hi, I'm so-and-so from Monroe Avenue. I'm from Lyle Avenue, et cetera. They began to immediately make a connection with the graduating class. That kind of went away some years ago, but I hope that we'll bring it back, and maybe it is being planned to bring it back. Because if you're going to go work in a neighborhood and you're new to that neighborhood, one of the first things you do is you kind of check out the neighborhood, right? You go find out where's a good coffee shop, where's a good restaurant, where can I go hang out, where there's a library, et cetera. I think that's the same that should happen when we have graduates come into our neighborhoods. Introduce them to the Black Club leaders, to the neighborhood association, to the business associations. Encourage them to get out of the car and go get a Pepsi here, stop and get a hot dog at the cart over here. When I started with the city in 2000, that was a practice. I would see officers all the time stopping. They were not just at donut shops, that whole thing about donut shop. They were at, getting a Cuban sandwich or getting this. And the vendors and the business owners knew them by name. And they knew each other's families. Hey, how's so-and-so? I heard he graduated. I heard so-and-so got married. That was a family. And I think that needs to come back. I know that when we began to separate our precincts and we kind of did this whole thing, East Side, West Side, that kind of almost deployed people to areas that they were large. They were really large areas. And I know that we brought back our precincts, and we're seeing more officers knock on the doors. And we have neighborhood people who call me and say, hi, Officer Alvarado, he was here last night. Now they know them by name. And that's important. I think we need to get back to that community engagement, to encouraging officers to connect with the community, invite them to a Black Club party. I've seen officers enjoy some time at a Black Club party or enjoy a gardening event. Today we're going to clean up this lot and the officers are going to help us. I've seen officers try to dance some salsa at a Black Club party. It's all a lot of fun. And you get to see people kind of put their guard down and see the humanness of individuals. And I think we need to get back to that.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And Chief Katsali, I'll let you answer that.
No, I was just going to say those are excellent points, and I think where we've come to in policing is so technology driven. Instead of making those personal connections in a community, instead of having an officer assigned to one car beat for a 10 or 15-year career, in Brighton's obviously much smaller than the city. One of the things that I try to do is have those officers in those car beats, is what we call them, geographic areas on the map. They're assigned to that area so they get to know it. So when there's a problem in that area, I may not know exactly what that problem is, but I can go to that officer and they can identify that problem for me, and they know those contacts in that community. But things are so driven by 911 nowadays. And it's almost like the tail is wagging the dog. And I think we need to, as I said before, and I'll say again, we need to get away from that. We need to get back to community-oriented policing, because when we can get back to community-oriented policing and involving the community in the decisions we make, then some of those other chasing 911 driven calls, that'll hopefully dissipate.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in and answer. You asked about barriers, right? Like, what are some of the barriers we have right now to kind of resolve and some of the tensions that we see? And something I've been saying for a while, and I've been saying in any panel or discussion I can, is that we need to really focus on reconciliation, right? That's a huge thing, because for me, being a historian by trade, I just know that history, a lot of people look at history as a segmented thing, when in reality it's a continuum, right? Things that have happened in the past surely affect what happens right now. And so I think we need to really reconcile some of those things that happened in the past that we know about in order to really address the right now. If not, we'll just keep going in the cycle that we see and that we have been seeing. And so I gave an example earlier, and so I'll give it again, but my grandmother is 85. She turned 85 yesterday. Happy birthday again, Grandma, right? And so her grandmother was a sharecropper. So if people aren't familiar with what a sharecropper is, when they originally freed the slaves, there was a plan to give them resources. That's why you might have heard the term before, 40 acres and a mule. That was a real thing. It ended up not happening. So when slaves were freed, they couldn't get into good jobs because there were laws around that. They couldn't get the same education as their white counterparts because there were laws around that. They couldn't shop in the same stores, live in the same buildings, things like that, right? And so what ended up happening was slavery wasn't legal, but a lot of people who owned those organizations said, you know what, well, we'll pay them a lot less than what they probably should get paid, and they'll work the same way that they did agriculturally as slaves, but now just for a few more dollars, right? And so the people who actually enforced those laws to make sure that the slaves were, well, sharecroppers at the time, were doing what they were supposed to do, were police, right? And a lot of those interactions weren't pretty. So you can imagine what my great-great-grandmother, what her story would be to her kids and what the narrative would be to her kids, right? Fast forward to my grandmother, who's 85. So we're talking one lifetime. Like, my grandma's alive right now. She grew up in South Carolina, in Jim Crow, South Carolina, right? And so we are familiar with that. We've seen those atrocities. You can go look and see those right now online, right? As far as not being able to drink out the same water fountain, couldn't get to the same schools and education, couldn't ride the same buses, okay? And so if you think about those experiences and who enforced those laws, law enforcement, because this isn't just to vilify police. If you think about this, these are laws that were structured that police were enforcing, right? Law enforcement. If you think about her experience and what narrative she would be painting from some of those experiences, right? Fast forward to our generation, what will be the community's mindset in terms of police right now when we think about barriers, right? And so just to give an example, let's say John Doe just graduated from the academy. He's a white guy from the suburbs, got his first policing job, okay? He gets a call. He's not outwardly racist. He just might have some implicit bias like we all do, right? Gets a call in the neighborhood. They say, hey, there's some commotion going on. Can you come down and check it out? John Doe goes down there. It's in a Black community, right? He gets out the car, and before he even has an interaction with these individuals in his Black community, they're already on the offensive, right? Defensive. Hey, why are you here? Why are you picking on us? Get away, hurling insults, right? So John Doe was thinking, man, I don't even know these people. Why are they treating me like that, right? But what John Doe doesn't see is all of the historical narrative that have been passed down from generation to generation, right? So after 3 years of that, John Doe, of course, is going to be jaded about the community that he might be in because he doesn't have the context to what is driving that narrative. And so when we think about all these historical things, before we can really make real change, we have to address those first, or it's just going to be a cycle. So things like in our law enforcement agencies, how can we have training and interventions on the historical context of law enforcement in the Black community or communities of color? So that way now when people go out, they have empathy and know why, you know, people might be put off by their presence there, you know? But until we address that, there's no way we can go forward. If not, we'll just be covering up things that are already there.
Hey, let me steal Isaiah's role for a second. Herb, what does reconciliation mean for you? Like, can you help us with that? Like, reconciliation can mean different things to different people. How do you see reconciliation?
Yeah, reconciliation is saying, hey, we acknowledge and address and are aware of things that have happened in the past that affect the right now today. And so instead of ignoring those things, we're going to take those head on. And so that might look like, let's come together and have restorative or reconciliation circle discussions about these things and ask the community, what would you like to see happen? Kind of like the study is doing, right? Getting clear answers. Or let's have a police accountability board, which the city of Rochester did in 2019. It's on hold right now because of a lawsuit. But that is saying, let's have some accountability from the community about the police, because we know you've been affected negatively, right? So it's addressing those issues and not skipping over those things, because right now we put a Band-Aid over. I'll give this example. If I hurt my knee and I need surgery, but I'll wear a knee brace, I can wear a knee brace for only so long. Eventually, I'm gonna need the surgery, right? I think that's where we are right now. And so reconciliation is addressing that actual problem, getting to the root of that problem. And I'm hoping the study is gonna be the start to that. But yeah, Joe, good question.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was a great example. And just kind of to use the example of you told with John Doe and his situation. So, you know, in theory, we're saying, you know, John Doe might be in his mindset, look, I didn't do anything per se to you guys, to anybody in this community, and I'm being treated in such a way. And in that, you know, maybe in another situation, because of that, after a number of years and having situations like that, he maybe responds in a way that he's the first one to be a little bit more aggressive in a different situation. And now you're looking at those minorities in that community or in that community per se, who could say, hey, we didn't do anything to you. Why are you being so hostile? And so I think my question in this is, and anybody feel free to chime in with it, you know, with the media heightening this polarization of the two groups, you know, law enforcement and minority communities, who needs to be that first one to take a step and say, you know what, I'm going to extend the olive branch. I'm going to take the step forward in trying to resolve these tensions.
Well, I mean, I can start a little bit. That's where leadership comes in. That's where, you have to be comfortable to be uncomfortable. You have to have those conversations in the community. Some of the first conversations I had as a newly promoted captain a few years ago was sitting in small groups, having some of the conversations about how we got to where we are in policing. And when I say Rochester, I want you to understand, I don't mean just the city of Rochester. I say the greater Rochester region, because I certainly don't want to be picking on one community. Looking at some of the vicarious trauma, something like what Herb was talking about, trauma that's been handed down from generation to generation. I think we have to acknowledge that as police officers, and we have to be brave enough to have these conversations. And I was very heartened that we had so many people on today's panel and this afternoon, and I see there's a few dozen on tonight. So I think being out in the community, having these difficult conversations is a beginning. We need to have trust and legitimacy as police officers in order for us to effectively police. We cannot do this without the community. We need this consensus of the community. We need the input from the community, and we need the community's blessing to be police officers. To suggest that a community can divorce themselves from the police or vice versa, it's just not going to work. I think communities want good policing. What you hear from defund the police movement is they want to defund from bad policing. Communities want good policing. They want ethical policing. And I think that's something that we really have to work on a law enforcement side. But the short answer is I'm here. I know my fellow chiefs are here. I try to branch out into the community as much as I can outside of the borders of Brighton to hopefully be that voice and hopefully spark that conversation.
I'm going to echo a little bit on what Chief Cataldi said, and that is the question, who takes the first step? And I agree. I think that's what leadership is about. And also married to that is who is perceived in power, and the police is perceived to have power. So I think, it's like when you are in a circle and you look at, different folks representing different categories. I'm just going to pick a bunch of city people, and you have commissioners, you have directors, you have managers. To me, I report to a commissioner. So I'm going to perceive that commissioner has more power, and they do, than me. So in a circle of community, when they look at a resident, the resident is going to refer to the officer and say, they have the power. This is why when they call a police officer, they expect for that police officer to do something about an issue that they're calling about. Now we go back to the term that Chief Cataldi was using, procedural justice. If you explain well to that person that, yes, I understand this individual is, harassing and this, but it's not within, it's not a crime. It's just someone that they might even know the law and know how far to push. The person calling feels like, well, you've got the power, do something about it. They can't, they have to follow the procedure. And we have that back and forth a lot with situations that my offices get involved in, because they always come back to me and say, well, police said, forget about it. They can't do nothing about it. No, that's not what they said. What happened was they didn't explain to you the procedure so that they can help you understand why that step couldn't be taken. But this is where we have to go now. So I think there's some education behind this also that has to happen. But the perception of powers, it's how the community sees police. You have the power, you should be able to do this.
Joe, I know you were going to say something. I don't want to steal your thunder, though.
No worries, Herb. I know we're getting short on time. I think everybody's made the point. I think universally it's the police. Police are there. I used to be part of that. We're there to protect and serve. We're there to serve the public. If the public's not happy with you, you're not serving them appropriately. You need to change how you're doing it. It's that simple.
I just want to add one last thing too. I just love what everybody was saying, and Chief Authority was saying good things too. And I just think it also, like, the extended the olive branch to kind of be the first one to make that move. Coming from the police would be great, and it would be great for that to happen in action, like some actions that could be seen. And I think a few people mentioned the bus phrase, defund the police, which really people asking, how do we reallocate things to good policing, like they were saying. And so an example of that would be, we know, and it goes back to knowing the history, right? Reconciliation. So mental health has not been accessible in the same way to communities who've been impoverished, which have been mainly communities of color. So a lot of the times when police are deployed or things are happening, this might be somebody who's having a mental health breakdown. This might be schizophrenia. These might be things like that, right? And so we have heard people ask, wow, let's send trained, licensed mental health professionals if there's a situation like that, like we've seen with, and not to, I don't want to make it too controversial, but with Daniel Prue, right? That could have been an example of how can we maybe prevent something, right? I don't want to say it is or isn't, but that's an example. And so if you think about the history, and just historically how people haven't had access to mental health. And so that could be an action of, let's take the first step. We're going to set up some procedures or protocols that allow for that to happen in a certain way. And so police having the perceived power, like Daisy said, and maybe the resources to do that, that would be a great action step in terms of some reconciliation and taking that first step to extend the olive branch.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was good. And just real quick, I saw a few questions we've had come in through the question and answer. I would just encourage everybody else, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in there. We will have some time for question and answer. And I know we were scheduled to be done at 7:30. And so if people have to take off when we get to 7:30, we thank you for joining us, and we understand that you got to move along, but we will have a little bit of time extra past 7:30 to go and answer some of those questions. So again, please feel free to chime in with questions in the question and answer box. And so the next question, and Herb, you alluded to, taking action steps and moving forward with tangible things to get tangible results. And so with this study, it's just one step, right? But what do you hope this study and others like it will accomplish? Like, what do we hope to see maybe in the near future, in the short term, but then also in the long term, looking back or looking, years from now, being able to look back and say, hey, we got to this point here because of the study.
Is that to me first? Or you say her? Really?
Yeah, you can start off with that.
Okay, I thought you said her. Okay, but I honestly think the first step. I guess my hope is that Joe and I have been saying that this is the first step. Like, the study is just the first step, is getting the information. But my hope in the long term is that this will allow us to create some of the results or action steps based on what the community says, right? It won't be anybody prescribing what needs to be done. It's going to be actual action steps that come from the communities who are affected. And I used the example earlier, I use it again, is I coach basketball. And so if you're coaching, sometimes the best answer to a struggle or the best play comes from the player, right? The player who's actually out there involved in it can come back and tell you, here's what we should do. And so this study, if we can get those results and answers clearly, can give us our next step or our next play to go out there and address some of the things that we're seeing. So that's my hope, is that we get clear direction on where we should go from this.
I would agree with Herb, right? We want to get that data. We want to hear from the community itself. Then we want to be able to pass that information on to the law enforcement agencies represented by Chief Cathaldi, and then they can implement those changes. And I think, as we've said, our long-term goal would be that we see a reckoning and ultimately, hopefully, a changing of that impression with the young people of color, and then ultimately joining those departments and becoming those departments.
Yeah, the same for me. I'm just looking for, the evidence-based practices. Let's stop doing what we think works, and let's actually look at the data. Let's find out where we can improve, get those action items, set a plan, and then move forward from it. And I think the way we're going to know if we succeed is 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road from now, we'll be able to easily look back at our individual departments and see if the results of this study and those action items allow us to better diversify our departments.
Yeah, that's good. And so another question I had with that is, we do these sorts of things, and there's these programs, these studies, these different surveys in place, in order to better gain an understanding. And I'll start with Daisy on this one, and then open up to the rest of the panelists too. What's the response to a community member who may feel like, hey, I'm a member of this community, and I think this way that we're going about this is just completely wrong, and there's still issues? Because I think the reality of it is when you look into any group setting where there's multiple people involved, you get multiple personalities, you get multiple opinions. And as we talked about earlier, with the presence of social media, it seems like everybody has a voice and a platform to voice their opinion. And so again, Mike, the question, because I'm rambling a little bit, is, what is the response when people are outspoken about these? I'm a member of this community, and I think this is the wrong way to go about it.
Well, you just peeked into my life. That happens all day in and day out. So I could literally just point to 4 situations that we face right now. We have, but this is interesting. We have some parts of our city where the community has access to technology, has folks that can write well, and have folks that might have law degrees and different backgrounds. And I have a group like that right now in one part of the city, and they send me all kinds of information, and they just are very adamantly that their rights are being violated They even pull out injunctions, copies that they want me to read against that particular group, and why it continues to happen. So we sit at the table together with the police officers, the group that they're complaining about, the residents, and the law department. And we try to educate them on what we can and cannot do. And my goal when we have those kind of meetings, and we have quite a few of them, is for them to respect each other, understand each other's positions, and understand what the law says that we can and cannot do. And if they so feel like they want to challenge the law and begin to write legislation, hey, go for it. They could challenge it and maybe write up some new legislation and propose it. But that happens quite a bit. And we try to just bring them to the table and try to resolve the matter like humans, like people, and we should be respectful of each other. Now, I do have one particular area where there's someone who leads a particular group, and that person will have nothing to do with sitting down with the city. As a matter of fact, is suspicious of coming into City Hall because they believe they're going to be taped. I'm like, what's in it for me? We're not going to do that. We just want to have a conversation. How can we come to an understanding that you are a resident, you are a business, and we need to have the police at the table to talk about this so that you can understand what the police can do and what they cannot do. So it's a matter of, it takes a little training on dialogue, conversations with people, a lot of understanding of body language, looking at the body language, looking at the hidden messages that they send you. By the time one of these meetings is done, you could almost tell who's gonna take the advice and work and who's gonna just keep doing what they're doing, and that's what they wanna do. I've come to learn in this position that some folks just need to have the last word, whether they're right or wrong, they just need to have it. And I'm okay with that. I raised 3 teenagers, I get it, but it's part of the job, and we just try to my goal is to come to resolution to every problem that's presented to us. In some cases, it just has to move on to a higher level.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's good. So anybody else have any opinion on that?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, I just think sometimes instead of working on, we get so far apart on the fringes of, that bell curve. We're so far apart, and it's not always the loudest voice, the one with the biggest bullhorn that we have to listen to. We have to come to the middle section where we know we can move and where we know we can create consensus, and we just need to move forward. And as Daisy said, not everybody all the time is going to agree with that. But there are times when we just need to agree without being disagreeable.
All right, don't want to make sure I'm not cutting anybody off. Don't want else to speak. So if nothing else. Okay, cool. So that was the last question that we had as far as that we wanted to address to our panelists, but there are a few questions within the question and answer box. So I'm going to pull up a couple of those and go through them. And again, if you got questions while we're doing this, even feel free to type them in there and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And so the first one, and so Herb, I think you may be able to answer this one just quick. Is it possible to see the survey online anywhere?
Yes, so that will be available in a follow-up email. One of our folks will talk to you a little bit about that at the end of this. But yes, you'll be able to see the survey and participate. And yeah, so the answer is yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then the next question is, how do we use the data and research we have already today to inform how officers police Black and Brown communities? And for example, in May 2020, NYU published research that showed Black drivers are more likely to be stopped by police. What are police departments doing with this sort of data to inform change? Are they evaluating their own local traffic stop data to see how it compares, or if they have this issue?
Well, a couple things, and I'll speak. So when I mentioned I talked for the broader community, now I'll speak strictly for Brighton. A couple things. Number one, we're a small enough community. You can go on the town of Brighton's website. You can find my name, and my name's up there. My email address is up there, and I encourage the community, whether it's a compliment or a complaint, because we've got those bias-based policing and profiling complaints, and I address those complaints head on. We have a body-worn camera program to address that. Looking at the individual data on a local basis, it's a little bit more difficult for me doing that as we're only 40 officers, 36,000 plus residents. But I'm really looking at doing more of that, doing a deeper dive into some of the numbers that we're looking at. This year, specifically for Brighton, you'll see a difference in our annual report. We'll have more reporting on who we're interacting with, and there'll be a demographic breakdown of that. But we do look at that data, and I encourage people. I've had people in my office that have claimed that they have been racially profiled, and we'll look at that incident. I'll look at that incident with them from start to finish on a body-worn camera. And like I said, we investigate those complaints.
Yeah, thank you. And so, Herbert, you gonna say something?
Yeah, just to kind of get at like where we are with that. And so I'm not working for a law enforcement agency, but just from the outside looking in, the things that I've been able to pick up on based on my conversations with folks who are in those spaces, is that I think what we've seen is once again, go back to history, right? Over time, there's been some things that have bubbled up to the surface when it comes to communities of color, Black and brown communities, and law enforcement, right? And those have come out in certain incidents, right? Whether it be Rodney King in LA in the 80s, whether it be fast forward to Michael Brown, fast forward to all these instances that bubble up, right? And those are the mainstream instances, but underneath that are frequent micro incidents that happen, right? That don't make it to the main stage. And those are the things that kind of erode at a community and the trust, right? But what I think what's happening now is we're seeing, I think there's always been people who've wanted to make change in that area. Like there are some police chiefs or law enforcement agencies who want to make change, but we just didn't see the urgency to make change, right? I think right now what we're seeing in our community, and I think the community is really asking for this in a loud way, is the urgency. Like this is affecting people on a day-to-day basis. And so I would say, I think just based on the conversations we're having, what we're seeing happening with the city of Rochester, I'm from Detroit, similar things happening there. And some of the navigation we're seeing is now it's becoming a priority and a must for law enforcement agencies. And I think that's a good thing, right? And the people who have always wanted to do this, who may not have been able to, or maybe they were in the minority of police chiefs or law enforcement agents who wanted to do this, didn't feel comfortable stepping out on a limb to do something like this study, now have the backing of the community to do that, right? To make those changes. And so I think that's the way we're headed. And I think from this study and studies like it, we'll see some long-term change from it.
Yeah, thanks, Herb and Chief Cathaldi for touching on that. And so let me just double check. I believe that was the last question. Oh, there may be one more in there. Sorry about that. Nope, we got one more. So are police departments aware of the trends within their departments, and specifically evaluating if there is a bias? And so Chief Cathaldi, I'm sure you can kind of touch on that.
Yeah, as Herb said earlier, we all have biases. College professors had biases, police officers, doctors, lawyers. It goes across the spectrum. Where the problem comes in is when we act upon those biases, and we take great strides in training our officers to recognize their individual biases and not to act on them. We've also done racial justice training in our department to help officers better understand policing communities of color, in where some members from the communities of colors are coming from, their perspective, if you will. So are we aware of their biases? Yes, everyone has biases. I have them. I think the goal is to get people to recognize their biases and not act on their biases.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. Absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to keep double checking. I don't see any more questions in there, but I just wanted to give all of our panelists just a quick opportunity if anybody wanted any last closing remarks before we kind of wrap it up and pass it over to Michelle. I know this has been a great time for education and to be able to learn. I think the reality of it is we have 4 panelists who wear 4 different pairs of shoes and have 4 different sets of eyes and have 4 different viewpoints on things and perspectives. And so anytime that we're able to understand better where certain people are coming from that we may not understand, I think that allows people the opportunity to be educated, and which benefits our society greatly. So I just want to thank all of our panelists for their time and providing some insight into a topic that is, heavily affecting our country and countries around the world today. So thank you for that. Thank you for everybody that's been able to join us and submit some questions and be a part of this conversation. And so, Michelle, with that, I will pass it over to you.